Hello rowers, this is Travis back again with another training video, and today I'm going to do something a little different than I have been doing. And so I've been talking a lot about kind of training theory and concepts for my videos the last couple of weeks, but I want to kind of step away from that and get into a lot of detail for this video and talk specifically about how I go through setting up a oxygen transport training session for athletes within the aerobic base building training phase. All right, so during the 9 months or so prior to your competitive preparation phase, if you're peaking once a season. If you're peaking twice a season, then you probably only have a couple months to spend in your aerobic development phase. But your oxygen transport workouts are workouts that are designed to get your heart stronger, all right? Your heart being a muscle, and the more you work that muscle, the stronger it's gonna get. And as you're putting in more and more time developing your aerobic capacity and developing your capillary beds and within your circulatory system, if you're just laying more and more kind of piping, as it were, your aerobic piping within your circulatory system, if you're not increasing the strength of your heart, the pump, then your blood pressure there is not going to be able to keep up with where it was before, all right? So the more aerobic training that you do, you have to make sure that you're getting a proportional improvement in the strength of your heart to take full advantage of that aerobic development. And that's what the goal of oxygen transport training is going to be outside of the competitive phase. Now within the competitive phase, you still want to be training your oxygen transport capacity and your that strength of that heart, but you also need to be fine-tuning the anaerobic capacity and getting the body used to working in a lactate-rich environment. And so the character of your oxygen transport training sessions are going to be a little bit different as you get closer to competition than they're going to be in your aerobic training phase, where you're just trying to get that cardiac benefit of your training, and you're not worried about that conditioning to dealing with lactic acid. All right, and so with that, we're gonna talk through my favorite workouts for oxygen transport that I use with my athletes at all levels. And that's 3-minute pieces, generally with 3 to 8 repetitions. Maybe you could go to 10 if you were an elite athlete. And then the rest period somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes. Again, maybe an elite athlete can get that down to 3, all right? But I say elite athlete, not all the ambitious people out there that might be listening that want to be an elite athlete but aren't there yet, all right? Stay within that 4 to 6 minute range and that 3 to 8 repetition range. And so it seems simple, it's 3-minute pieces, but when you add all the variables and when you're structuring a workout, there are 4 critical variables that you need within that workout. So you have the repetitions that you're gonna complete with that interval, you have the rest period, you have the stroke rates that you're gonna be using, and you have the damper setting, the drag factors, all right? And that last one is one that 95+% of coaches neglect. And I think people in the sport really don't understand drag factor, all right? I do have a video kind of talking in depth about that. I'll link it up here in whatever these corners that white box pops up, and you can kind of listen along to understand my theory about drag factor. But in my opinion, if someone prescribes a training session that doesn't include those 4 variables, then that is an incomplete prescription for a training session, and it really doesn't tell me a whole lot. Because if I say, well, I want you to do 5 by 3 minutes, well, you're like, well, how much rest do I need? And if someone's like, well, 5 by 3 minutes, and I want you to do 4-minute rest, and you're like, okay, well, you know, if I do that and I use a stroke rate of 24 to 28, then that's going to be a very different workout than if I use stroke rates of a 26 to 32. And then similarly, if you prescribe that and you don't specify the damper setting, and granted, a lot of people in the sport don't really understand the damper setting, and they're just going to use the same damper setting and drag factor regardless of what workout they're doing. I don't believe in that. I think that you should be using your drag factor like you would use gears on a bike to cycle through, and that'll change depending on what your goal is for that particular training session. But you can certainly, if I'm doing a 3-minute piece at a 26 strokes per minute, and let's say my split is a 143, Well, if I want to and I'm assuming that I'm maintaining a good drive speed with that. Well, if I want to go faster, all right, without slamming the legs and changing what that ideal drive speed is, then I could increase my drag factor by maybe 2 or 3. So maybe going from a 112 to 115. And that will allow me to keep my drive speed the same, keep the same stroke rate, and get maybe half a second to a second faster on that split. All right, and so that damper steady drag factor is a variable, and I encourage people to learn how to use it. But taking that workout, all right, and so we're talking about 3-minute intervals, and we're using 4 to 6 minute rest. All right, and so there's extraordinary flexibility with that workout depending on your skill level, your experience level, your age, and where you are within your training cycle. All right, so the low end of that workout would be 3 by 3 minutes with 6 minutes of rest, and I would maybe use stroke rates in a 22 to a 24, 26 range. And I would give that workout to novices that are doing their first ever transport workout. I would give that workout to middle schoolers, though perhaps with middle schools I would bring the stroke rate down even more if they're not able to get a good power per stroke. But it's 3 minutes with double rest, so 6-minute rest, so a lot of rest. And you're really just kind of, for those athletes, you're really just stimulating that transport capacity. You're getting that heart rate up, beyond where it would normally fall for any kind of aerobic work or steady state, to get that heart used to pumping a little bit faster and a little bit stronger. And now, as you develop further, and actually before I kind of go on, with that 3 by 3 minutes with that 6-minute rest, I would use that for novices doing their first session for the first time. I would use that for masters that are just coming into the sport and not very well conditioned, or they're maybe only training 2 or 3 times a week and they're not able to get a real significant amount of training volume. I'll do it for myself if I'm just getting back into training for the first time after a long break. And in fact, I did it last year when I was doing my vlogs. My first transport workout was 3 by 3 minutes, and it may have been 4, but I think it might have been 3 though, with 6-minute rest. And it's just patient, all right, with your goal with this training. And I think a lot of people don't understand kind of their goal with training sessions. It's really just to get to the threshold of your ability and just kind of push that threshold just a touch, all right? And so you don't want to be continually giving yourself training sessions that require race quality effort to execute, because your body doesn't adapt to a super stimulus, all right? Your body is either stimulated to make an adaptation or it's not stimulated to make an adaptation, all right? If you stress the body beyond its normal limit, it's going to make that change. If you stress it well beyond its limit, it's not going to make more of a change, all right? It's kind of like a pass-fail system, all right? It's an either or, all right? You're either stressing your body enough to adapt, or you're not stressing your body enough to adapt, all right? And so a good coach is going to assign training sessions that are just going to be right at the threshold ability of their athletes, and maybe pushing just a touch back, and then you're going to back off. You're going to rest and recover, and then hopefully for the next session you've had a positive adaptation, and then you can push a little bit more, all right? And so whether you're an athlete early in your career, or whether you're just getting back into training after a long break, you want to just stimulate a little, come back, and then on your next session, if you've made a good adaptation, you can push it a little bit more. And with those 4 factors I gave for that training session, so the repetitions, the rest interval, the stroke rate, and the drag factor, if you're improving on any of those 4 factors, then that is a sign that you've made a positive adaptation, all right? And so if I'm doing 4 by 3 minutes with a 6-minute rest at a stroke rates of 24 to 30, and at, let's say, a 112 to 118 drag factor, on that next, if I do the exact same repetitions and rest interval and drag factors on my next workout, and I'm hitting the same splits, but I'm maybe 1 or 2 beats below on my stroke rate, then that is a positive adaptation, all right? So I've basically been able to create the same amount of speed with less strokes per minute, all right? And so there's lots of ways to measure your training adaptation, and people get so fixated on just the speed, all right, how many meters you've gotten within that interval, or what that split is, as the only measure of whether they're getting faster or not. And that's a huge error that people make, and I think that that contributes to a lot of frustration that people have when they're looking at their training. They're saying, oh, well, I'm plateaued, I'm not getting any faster. They're only looking at that split, all right? They're not realizing that maybe they're getting that same split and their stroke rate is a little bit lower, or maybe they're getting that same split and their heart rate isn't as high as it was before. You know, all these are, maybe they're holding the same split, but they're doing an extra interval, or maybe they're holding the same splits and they're having just a little bit less rest. All of those are indications of a positive training adaptation. And so that's why it's important to track all of those factors during that training session, so that you can motivate yourself and kind of stay motivated, especially for the more experienced athletes, where training adaptations and gains come in very small amounts, and they're not like a novice where you're going a second faster or 2 seconds faster on your average every time you do an anaerobic workout for the first time. But going back to, you know, how are we going to assign this workout depending on where you are? So if you have a very young and inexperienced athlete, you got those 3 repetitions of 3 minutes with 6-minute rest, relatively low stroke rate. And then as you advance forward, if I had, let's say, a first-year varsity youth athlete, then I'm probably going to start the season doing 4 of those repetitions with 6-minute rest. And I'll give athletes the option to do a 5th or 6th repetition. And if they have been able to execute those 4, and they've been able to maintain or negative split on their performance during that, then they have the option of doing a 5th interval. And if they continue that trend, if that 5th interval is slightly faster, slightly better than the 4th interval, then they can do a 6th interval. And then, you know, it's up to me to decide what is the maximum volume that I want them to do, of whether we just keep going or whether I stop it. And usually I have a hard stop, all right? So usually I'll say, all right, athletes, we're doing 3-minute pieces today. We're doing a minimum of 4 repetitions and a maximum of 7, and you can only continue past the 4th if you are able to maintain or negative split from one piece to the next. And part of the way that I'll help ensure that they should be negative splitting is we will bump the stroke rate a little bit for each interval. So I don't want it to just be you're pushing harder on each interval, all right, pushing harder through the drive. I want to say we're shifting gears, all right, we're changing that stroke rate a little bit from one interval to the next. So if you're maintaining consistent leg speed through the drive for a 3-minute piece out of 24, and you bump that to a 26 stroke rate, keeping that leg speed through the drive consistent, then you should negative split. And I can look at an athlete and I can say, well, if they're increasing stroke rate and they're not going faster on their split, then something's wrong there, all right? So they're carrying too much fatigue. It may be time to end the workout session there, or we just need to train them to use their power per stroke more effectively. Whatever it may be, that's where the coaching and the experience of the coach comes in, to be able to look at what's happening and to make a decision about how to react and how to adjust, whether we need to give the athlete coaching or guidance to make a specific change, or whether we need to end the workout a little bit early and go from there. It's not just a matter of always push harder, work harder, work harder. And, you know, I really don't like coaches that are just fixated on, you know, if they don't see the performance that they want, they're just like, well, you just got to work harder. It's like, well, if you're prescribing the right training session, if you've done a good job of structuring that training session in a way that that athlete can be successful, and you've given them the ability to be successful in that session, then there's no reason they shouldn't be. And you shouldn't be considering just their physical ability. You really need to be considering their psychological ability and their mental toughness and their maturity when you're prescribing that training session. But coming back to the 3 minutes, all right, and part of why I love it is, you know, we said, okay, well, I'm giving these athletes a session, and let's say it's first year varsity, relatively early in the season. I want you to do at least 4 and as many as 6 repetitions of these 3 minutes. And then I also have another kind of card up my sleeve for adapting that to the athletes with the rest, all right? And so if I have an athlete that's come into that season and they've done their aerobic base training, they got a really good fitness base, then I can say, all right, and they've been doing this for a couple years, then I can say, okay, well, you probably only need 5 minutes of rest, all right? Because I know that if I give them 5-minute rest, they're going to be fresh and ready to do the next interval. They don't need that extra 1 minute of rest, all right? And my goal with the rest is not to make the training session harder. My goal with the rest is just to not give people more rest than they need, all right? So it's to be able to look at the athlete and say, well, you're aerobically fit enough that you can recover within 5 minutes, and that athlete needs 6 minutes to be able to recover. And if we're prescribing the same workout later in the season, so a lot closer to the competitive phase, and these athletes are fit and they've been doing their transport work on a regular basis, then maybe they only need 4 minutes to recover enough to replicate that effort, all right? And so as a coach, I know if I'm decreasing the rest for those athletes from session to session, month to month basis, and they're not improving on their speed in their meters that they're achieving per repetition, then I've made a bad decision in terms of how much rest that they should have, all right? And so if you're doing it right, you should be able to decrease the rest without having any impact on their ability to perform during the interval in question, all right? It's just a matter of efficiency of time, all right, and making sure you're continuing to stimulate them. And those are the basics. And then with stroke rates, what I use for stroke rates is also going to depend on kind of the experience of the athlete, and how old they are, what their skill level is technically in terms of what stroke rates I'm going to be using. And so generally for athletes that are earlier in their career or younger, I'm going to be using stroke rates in a lower range. And so I might even start the first piece at a 22, because I really thinking about that first piece as almost an extended warm-up, and I really just want to reinforce a good power per stroke. I know that they're not going to get a high level of lactic acid within that system at a 22, but if I'm working with a middle schooler or a novice athlete doing anaerobic work for the first time, and I've been working my butt off to get them to be effective rowing at an 18 or 16 strokes per minute on their steady state, then I don't want to say, all right, row at a 30 at full pressure, because they don't have the ability or fitness to do that, all right? But I do always want them to row at a high pressure per stroke. And if they can only maintain a high pressure per stroke at a 22 to 26, then I want to start that workout, and I want to say, all right, we're at 22, but it is a high pressure per stroke. And then when we go to a 24 on the next interval, you should be going faster, all right? And so if you started out and you were hitting a 156 split, then your next one should be a 155 split when I bump your rate from a 22 to a 24. And if they're not able to do that, then you've got to pull back, you've got to adjust, because you've assigned something that is outside of their ability, their skill level. And then extending that to the higher level, a more fit athlete that is, training to compete at the national level, you would start that workout, say they're doing 8 by 3 minutes, you start at a 24, maybe a 26, and then each repetition you're just bumping that stroke rate up 1 or 2 beats. I would usually just do it 1 beat, and so I'd either do 8 repetitions, start at a 24, and then each repetition you're going up, and so it's at 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. All right, so maybe 24 or 25 I would start, because I want them to end up at a 32. And another way I could do that is I could say, all right, well, we're going to do 2 out of 24, 2 out of 26, 2 out of 28, 2 out of 30, 2 out of 32, 1 out of 32, whatever it may be. And then also if I again, I want them to be increasing their meters with each repetition, right? This is another important thing, is that whenever we're doing oxygen transport in an aerobic training phase, I want them to be learning the skill of negative splitting, of increasing their speed as they go through the workout. And so if we're doing repetitions of 3 minutes, and let's say the third and fourth piece are both at a 26 stroke rate, but I want them to go faster on that second piece, and I don't want them to go faster just because they're slamming their legs down faster and going at a faster than ideal drive speed, then I would increase the damper setting, all right? And so let's say, we're pulling a 148 split at a 26 strokes per minute for 3 minutes at a 112 drag factor. And I want to do the next piece without increasing the stroke rate, but I do want them to go a little faster. Increase that drag factor to 114. And then they should be going, a half second or so faster on that next interval, because they have a little bit of extra resistance that they're working with in that session. And so that's kind of all my thoughts that are going on when I'm prescribing these training sessions. And when you're a coach working with a team of athletes, I love this 3-minute session too, because you can literally give every athlete in that team of multiple 8s worth of athletes a different training session that is customized for them. And to them, they're all doing 3-minute pieces, all right? But if one group is doing 3-minute pieces with 6-minute rest, and another group's doing 3-minute pieces with 5-minute rest, and another group is doing 3-minute pieces with 4-minute rest, and within that group, some people are doing 5 reps, and some people are doing 7 reps, and some people are doing 8 reps, and maybe your kind of early group was 6 minutes, some of them are doing 4 reps. Those are all completely different training sessions. And then add in stroke rate, all right? You know, less experienced people are starting at a 24, your more experienced people are starting at 26, whatever it may be. For those athletes, they're doing 3-minute intervals, all right? And they see all their teammates doing 3-minute intervals. And when they're writing their meters for each interval up on the board, it's all consistent output that you're producing on that session. But you as a coach know that all of those athletes are getting a training session that has been customized to their skill level, to their ability level, to their fitness, all right? Just by tweaking that rest, the stroke rate range, and maybe the damper setting a little bit. And so for me, as someone who really advocates the value of individualized training, but I don't want to create this sense within the team that everybody is doing something different, all right? I still want to keep this sense of kind of unity within the team. This is an amazing way to do it, all right? Because those athletes are not thinking in the sense of, well, he's doing 4-minute rest and I'm doing 5-minute rest. What's up with that? Usually they're like, okay, well, good. I'm glad I got 5-minute rest and I'm impressed that he can do 4-minute rest. All they care about is that they're doing 3-minute pieces and 3-minute intervals, all right? So they still have that team mentality, like they're working together. Hey guys, this is Future Travis cutting in here. So I was just editing this video and there were 2 points that I didn't really cover that I want to make sure that I don't neglect. And one was that within each of these 3-minute training sessions, I'm also expecting my athletes to maintain or negative split, all right? And so if an athlete is starting a 3-minute interval and they're starting at a 152 split, they should be finishing at a 152 split or lower, and ideally lower. And so a lot of times, you know, I was saying for these intervals, we might do some at a 24, some at a 26, some at a 28. Well, I'm also shifting that stroke rate within the interval. So let's say I'm building from a 24 to a 26. So one interval, let's say the first interval is at a 24 the whole way through. The next interval, it's half out of 24, half out of 26, so 90 seconds and 90 seconds. And then the next interval, maybe it's 1 minute out of 24 and 2 minutes out of 26. All of these manipulations in terms of stroke rate are also setting them up where they should be negative splitting if they're maintaining consistent power per stroke, all right? And that I definitely don't want an athlete starting at an interval at a 152 and finishing at 153, 154. That is a huge no-no, all right? And my athletes know that every time they sit down on the erg and do any kind of interval, they should be finishing that interval slightly faster than they began that interval, all right? And so that pacing is a critical skill that they're gonna need to transfer to when they're on the water. And then the final thing is, I talked a lot about kind of damper setting throughout this conversation, and the reality is that I'm really not putting that damper setting, that option of adjusting damper setting, I'm really not putting that option in the hands of the athletes, all right? There's a lot more complexity to that and nuance, and so that's something that I use as a coach, and I might adjust with them if I want them. So I'll just walk over, I'll just bump up their damper setting just a touch, maybe like a third of a number on the damper, or I'll tell them to do that, just bump it up just a touch, but I'm not letting them make that decision on their own, because I do think that as a more advanced training concept, and I don't want to kind of burden the athlete with that additional kind of factor to consider, all right? I think that power per stroke and stroke rate and pacing so that they're negative splitting is enough information for those athletes to consider, all right? So that's me, Future Travis, cutting out. Let's get back to the main video. And so that's it, all right? So 3-minute intervals, my kind of favorite go-to oxygen transport workout to use in the aerobic base building phase. When I do shift into a competitive phase, I'm doing oxygen transport in a different way. And so if you're using a CAT 1 through 6 system, transport encompasses category 2 and category 3. This oxygen transport that we've been talking about here is category 3, and so if I get into a competitive phase, I'm going to be working more in that category 2 range with maybe a little bit of category 3. You can also say, if you're talking about just oxygen transport, so a TR training phase, then I would split into TR1 and TR2, and everything we've been talking about here with this 3 minutes is TR2. TR1 would be those race specific intervals, so intervals that are done at or slightly faster than race pace, and I talked about that in my other video relatively recently. I'll link that up here, talking about how to structure a training session to prepare for racing. That is transport 1 or category 2 training, all right, and this is transport 2 or category 3 training. I think that covers it. And so hopefully that gave you guys the info you need to kind of set up a oxygen transport session within the aerobic base building phase, and the understanding that it's not just about doing more intervals with less rest. All right, the rest is there to ensure that you can complete the volume of intervals that you think is appropriate for the amount of aerobic training that you've been putting in. And for that, within the base building phase, about 82-83% of your miles should be in the UT2 zone, and about 5% of your miles should be in, is that 5? No, 2.5% of your miles or minutes within that training period should be done at a oxygen transport pace. And so do the math there in terms of figuring out how much transport volume you should have for the amount of UT2 volume that you're doing, and you can say, okay, well, over this course of this week, and let's try to make these numbers kind of jive. I'm gonna cut here while I do this math. Okay, so for the calculator, I just said, all right, if I'm gonna do 12 minutes of transport work for my workout, then I should have about 400 minutes of UT2 training logged to justify that. All right, and if I did my math, I'm hoping I did that math correctly. That's assuming that 83% of your training is UT2 and 2.5% of your training minutes are transport. All right, and so I use that as a good system to know, one, when I should be doing a transport session, and also how much I should be doing in that transport session. And so if I'm in my training zone and I've only accumulated 300 minutes since my last transport session, then I shouldn't really be doing another transport session. I should wait until I get 400 minutes in, another 100 minutes of steady state in, and then I can log a transport session with 12 minutes of volume, so a 4 by 3 minute transport session. And then if you're somebody who's logging steady state at a much higher rate, and let's say you're doing 800 minutes in within a week of training, well, within that week, you can do 24 minutes of transport work, all right? So you get your 800 minutes in within that week, and then do a transport session where you're doing 8 by 3 minutes, so 24 minutes of transport volume, and that's how I know when to do transport and how much to do transport. So that's that. That probably will spark some more questions. Shoot them down in the comments below. I'm happy to answer them. But I think that's it. I think that's a good place to wrap. And so thanks, guys. I hope this helped. I hope it kind of helped to kind of get out of the theoretical and talk a little bit more nitty gritty of how I structure a workout for my athletes and how I sign it across those athletes, and so that you can take that information and design your own training programs instead of just kind of looking at what somebody else did and saying, oh, well, I'm going to do that, even though they have absolutely no insight into my personal history, my personal ability, or where I am within my training cycle. So that's it. This is Travis signing off. Subscribe if you like this and you want more videos like it. Comment below if you have any questions. Like the video if it helped. Share it if you know other people that you think can benefit from it. And that's it. Take care, guys. Peace.